how do you approach then like a rectangular shape when you're thinking about composition?
Well, have you talked at all about like the idea of thirds?
We've talked about thirds and the golden ratio. They're
Right.
also familiar with.
Right. So they say, and every rule is made to be broken in a sense. So you don't want to like design a painting precisely by the rules, but you want to be aware of what's generally going to look best, so that if you're breaking the rules, it works, and you realize, okay, this is breaking the rule a little bit, but there's a reason this works. Okay, it's better than just like randomly not knowing what's going to look good and end up with a really horrible composition, which can happen. So if you do the thirds thing, I mean, it applies to a square as well, but it changes things a little bit in how, and none of these are squares, but this one's getting, well, actually, this is square.
Right.
And so I don't have like the main interest plunked right in the middle. I mean, the Thunder Swan is all set to the side, but then kind of crosses over to the other side to create a balance. And so you have, it's not the normal kind of a composition. I mean, you know, these are more typical compositions. And the idea of thirds looking good, well, if you realize this line created by the shadow of that bale is almost at a third mark. This line of the tree line here is almost at a third, so it's almost divided into thirds that direction. The bale is kind of sitting not right in the center. The main bale is over a little bit this way, but it's balanced by smaller bales going that way. So it has some pretty typical compositional elements. This one is kind of 1/3, 2/3, but it's less than a third, more than 2/3. So it's pushing that 1/3 thing a little bit, which creates kind of a feeling of big sky. Because since the sky is a little more than 2/3 of it, it's like, whoa, you know, because it's sort of like, it's cool that there's this big winter sky with the blue, and then it's, you know, this is actually getting late afternoon, getting towards sunset, but not in the bright direction. The sunset's the opposite direction. It's that glow you get opposite the sunset sometimes.
I can feel the weather in that one. Like I can feel the temperature outside in that one.
Okay, what was
I love that. I know. Well, because you can see the snow, but you also can sense the warmth, that it was like a little sunnier of a warm day.
It was one of those days where it's warm enough, the snow's melting a little. It's like 40 degrees.
Yeah.
I'm having a good time out there. You know, I felt pretty good.
But it's clear, so there's a little bit of bite.
And then
because
as
the
it starts
sky's
getting
clearer.
that glow and it starts getting towards sunset and the temperature starts going down, colder.
Yeah.
I can barely paint anymore. But it was oil, so the paint wasn't going to freeze up, but it was probably getting down a little bit below freezing, but with oil, so it doesn't matter. So I quickly finished. But one of the things that happens with plein air painting is it makes you hurry, and that can be good. I mean, it sounds bad, but it kind of makes you not monkey around with little tiny details and all that.
Right,
plein air being
outside.
Either the light's changing, or it's getting dark, or it's getting freezing cold, or something, or it's about to rain. I've had all those things happen, not all at the same time, but so there's reason you have to work fast, and that makes you focus on the essentials, which is what Impressionism is about. Focus on the essentials of getting the texture and the color and the masses, but don't mess around with every tiny little detail. So anyway, with the square, you kind of sometimes will play with that a little, because it's not the typical. Most of the time, a landscape is going to be wider than high, because our field of vision, we have two eyes that do binocular vision, but we also have side vision because we have two eyes offset a little bit. Our whole field of vision is a little bit wider this way than it is this way. So the natural thing in a landscape painting is to do something that's a little bit that way, because that's what our field of vision is like. It just feels good. You know, occasionally it's fun to do a landscape that's vertical, that's focusing on. Then you usually have a focus on a particular tree or a particular something that makes the vertical work well.
Right. But that's so true.
And another thing about landscapes that's often effective, you don't have to do, but it's often effective, is the idea of creating a feel. This one doesn't really do it because it's in a swampy area, but like this is a typical one. You should feel like you want to walk into that landscape. So there might be a little curvy road or path coming toward you that just invites you to walk in. Or in this case, the rows of the old harvested corn. You can just imagine yourself like walking right down that middle row out into the distance.
Right.
So it should feel inviting that way usually. You don't want to have something in your painting, in a landscape, that's like blocking your, like big rock right in the middle that I can't walk into it. There's a rock there. You know, you
Right.
don't want to have that
Right.
feeling. You want to feel
You're
invited
blocked.
into it.
You're blocked from walking through there.
Generally, unless you're trying to create a tension, then maybe you want that rock there, but it's got to create a tension because you feel like you can't walk into it. So what I did was, I actually forgot the photo I was going to work from. So I'll have to bring that tomorrow. Yeah, because that, I put things in all these different bags in the bank, but that photo that I nicely printed out is back at the school. So you've talked about color theory, right? And mixing
colors, yes.
So I, with rare exception, if I just gotta have something to get a color, I paint with what's called a limited palette of colors, meaning I don't have a whole bunch of different tubes of paint of different colors to paint from, and I mix. I mean, you're always having to mix everything up, but I had to mix everything up like from fairly primary colors. So I have no brown, no green. I use the black a lot. So I have white, yellow. Sometimes I use two different yellows, but it's not as necessary. Dark, like a deeper orange or a light lemon yellow, but I think I'm just going to use a single yellow. Two reds, but they're a red that leans just a little bit toward the orange side, if anything, which is a cadmium red medium. And then this red's more of a purplish red, magenta red. So I've got two reds and two different blues, which are dark, so they're hard to tell. This is ultramarine blue, which leans a little bit on the purple side, and is what I mostly use. And this other one, it's hard to see until you mix it with white, and then it gets really bright, is phthalocyanine blue, which is slightly greenish and really intense, like a boom, bright, slightly greenish blue, real intense. Which if you want to make like bright green, fairly bright green grass or something, you've got to use that one. So between these, I can mix almost everything I need. I can, you know, in nature at least. I mean, you wouldn't be able to mix some of the, you know, intense fluorescent colors or something. Most colors in nature you can mix from those basic colors. So I can mix whatever green I need, whatever brown I need from those. So I'm going to use a sponge for some of what I'm doing. Is there a pair of scissors around?
Yep.
A decent pair, because I want to, this is just a regular old sponge, but I'm going to trim it to kind of more of a rounded surface. So I'm going to do some of my applying paint with the sponge. I'll show you how to get some of the effect that you see on the swan. So the first thing I'm going to do, doing this painting, is real lightly underpaint just sort of the general colors there. So I'm then painting over kind of the approximate colors I want. So I'm not trying to cover up white, and then I'll start doing the texturing and all the other stuff to get the effect I want over top of kind of a very light, simple underpainting. And before I even really start underpainting, I want to place approximately where things are in the scene. And I'm not even going to use a pencil for that. I'm just going to mix up sort of a mix of paint so I might go back and forth with my right hand. It's better over here. So I'm going to look at like where that dark shadowed hill hits the painting, just a little below the halfway mark. And over here where the shadowed part comes to, which might be about in here. I just want to get some approximate line sketched in so I know about where things should end up. Where this road is disappearing over the horizon of the road, which is still well below the half. It's almost down to about the third mark. It's a little between a third and a half, about here. And the road ends up coming out kind of this way. This will all just help me be properly placed. Like that. And the road here. I always look at where things hit the edge. It helps me get these placed right. So, like where the edge of the road hits the edge of the canvas, will be down here, just in from the corner. Macadam kind of goes this as it goes around the bend. Very faint distant mountain, which is a little above the halfway mark, which is nice. You generally want to try to avoid having any horizon lines smack in the middle of any of the main elements. It's good if they're above or below. And again, nothing like cutting it right in half this way. That's that whole thing of avoiding halves and trying to shoot more for thirds in composition. I might make that tree a little bigger than it is, because I like that big tree here, but it just didn't end up in the picture. So I can always cheat a little bit on what's actually there. Even when you're working from photographic reference, don't feel like you had to do everything exactly the way it is. It's a painting, it's not a photograph, and you're allowed to, it's not going to be used as evidence in a trial or anything, so you're allowed to mess with it if you want to. All right, so I've got my basic layout of where things go. And being acrylics, that thin paint's drying off pretty much instantly, so I can just start painting right over it. So now I want to do a simple thin underpainting. So doing that, I'm going to start from the background and move toward the foreground generally, which is what you usually do with a landscape. I don't do it with everything with landscapes. So I'm going to mix up. And another thing is, photography doesn't capture things exactly like the human eye, because cameras don't have as much exposure latitude as your eye does. So a camera, in order to expose all of this well, the sky ended up being brighter and lighter and closer to being white than it really was. It really had more blue in it because the sky is more intensely bright with light than the foreground. And the camera, I could have done a lower exposure with the camera and gotten the sky bluer, and then this would have been too dark. So I had to kind of shoot for a happy medium. And so I'm going to make that sky a little bluer than it is because I know it was. And then another thing, skies almost always go from darker to lighter. You can't see it as much here because it's blasted out, but you can see it in this sky. You can see it in this sky. Under almost any conditions, it'll be closer to white at the horizon, deeper and deeper, and straight overhead it'll be the bluest, but that's straight overhead isn't in the picture. So, being acrylics, I need to keep this pretty wet. And this is just underpainting, so, and it's even going to go behind these trees. So this is not like a nice, neat coat of paint. And I have it thinned down, so it's kind of beating up a little bit. That's all right, it'll all dry. And I'm going to be painting over all of this anyway. And I'll start mixing a little more white in as I start coming down. I could use an even bigger brush for this if I had one with me. I don't have a real big brush, but that's all right. You don't want to mess around taking forever about this because, like I said, this is all getting covered up. This is just to establish the basic colors. And everything in that background, the further away you are, the more atmospheric effect causes it to both lose contrast and get cooler, more toward the blue end. So if you look way back here, that mountain back here is very pale, but it's kind of a very pale bluish gray color. And it's not because, if you were right up against it, it's not because that mountain's actually on the blue side, it's because atmospheric haze and everything absorbs certain wavelengths of light faster than others, so you lose, kind of use your yellows and reds first, and the blues are the last to lose, and that's why you've got purple to blue way in the distance. It's because of what the atmosphere is doing to it. So, back here. So that mountain way back there is they're pretty subtle. And to get something fairly gray, like grayish brown, I'm having to mix all three of my primary colors together. And then I just kind of go back and forth in how much. So if it's a little too red, I'll add a little bit more blue and yellow. If it's too blue looking, I'll add a little bit more red or red and yellow. So I'm not, so far I haven't used any of the black.
So he's just using like basically the primary colors.
Yep, this is primary.
He has like a set of 4 colors besides black and white that he uses. Yellow, like a red, orange, and magenta, and blue. To generalize those colors.
A yellow, 2 different reds. You can come look at it at some point if you want. A yellow, 2 different reds, and 2 different blues. Sometimes 2 yellows, but not always. And I keep looking back and forth between here and the photo to make sure I'm getting it about right.
Remember, some of you might need to like have a.
Over here, I'm getting a little bit more color in this. I'm just kind of looking for places that are using colors on my brush. For efficiency's sake, if I look around and say, oh, there's a little bit of that color in this area, that area, I'll do it while I've got it on my brush, so I'm not having to clean and get new paint on my brush as much. I'm staying away from the shadowed areas because that's all much darker tones, so I'm not getting into those at all yet. And in a way, when you're painting outside doing plein air work, and there's as much time to do like underpainting and all, you sort of dive right in doing painting loosely like this, and the whole thing will be a looser look. But you'll use thicker paint because, you know, this would be kind of thin looking if you just painted this way and that was it. So the really fast looking at it and trying to make quick decision I'm doing, that's how you would approach a plein air painting, but you'd be using a lot thicker paint usually than I'm doing, since this is meant to just be an underpainting. So we've got some brighter color, some brighter fall foliage here.
So did you just add that color to your brush without like painting it in between?
I real quickly dabbed it off a little bit, but unless I'm like painting something dark and now I want to do a bright light color or white or something, I don't clean my brush real carefully because a little bit of the color from before getting mixed in and muddying things a little bit. In nature, the colors all kind of have a little bit of the other colors in. There's like a muddying, they're not real primary and bright and different. So a little bit of contamination in your brush often works in your favor. It kind of helps the whole painting pull together.
I use that same word, muddy. Let it be a little muddied up.
Yeah, muddy's good. Muddy's good. And nature's muddy.
That's funny that you said this. I was like, that's the word I use to try to explain it.
Yeah, what else can you say about it? And see that dark color for that trunk, there's no black there. That's just the ultramarine blue and the cadmium red mix, and it gives a dark brown color, so it's pretty close enough to black for... At this point, you wouldn't want any pure blacks in this painting. It'd be way too intense. This is intense enough, and it's really not anywhere near pure black. Let's see, let's get this whole dark bank. keep adding a lot of water to this, because for this underpainting, I don't want the same kind of thick paint that I'll want later on. So adding a lot of water keeps it flowing easily and covering more quickly. And that's exactly what I want at this stage. Shadowed areas of the road.
But I'm like that.
Yeah, but up close it's like it's real thin, and I mean, but I want to be getting the color so that, I mean, if my composition is good, even this early stage, it should sort of start looking good from a distance, because it means compositionally the way the lights and the darks and all that are working. If even in the early stages it's like the dullest, boringest looking painting, maybe there's something not good about the composition. You know, if it isn't looking sort of good, even at real preliminary stages. And the whole question of why things look good compositionally is I don't know. You know, it's kind of a real psychological thing. Like, why do some compositions look good to you, more satisfying to you than others? I don't know.
I always find it interesting how like the scientific brained people then think about like the golden ratio and things like that to try to pinpoint why certain things are attractive.
I think a lot of things of why things look good to you or not, or why certain, you know, even a painting or a photograph or things create attention in you, that kind of thing. I think a lot of it, if you could trace it back far enough, goes way back to survival kind of things. Sort of, you know, it's safety
I have
thing.
had behind one of those.
Now, as I work this painting more, I want to make sure that I really get the feel of this, sort of this whole swath of bright light coming through a cutting bank there. That really adds a nice compositional thing. It's just suggested here, but I want to make sure that that really comes out well as I develop the painting, because that's an important part of what makes the painting work. Here. So of course this isn't quite as thin a painting, but you know, I'm starting to get a little bit more, a little thicker with my paint as I get finished up with the early stages. But soon I'll get a sponge on and really start adding texture to this, and it'll start taking on a whole different kind of a feel to it.
I feel like this is so satisfying. Is it relaxing?
While watching
They're
me
all
do
like really
watching me do it.
They're all like, isn't it satisfying?
trees. Shadow of this bank.
So while I, see, even there, I like it. I like it just like that.
And the light.
More comfortable.
All right, now when I start working with the sponge thing, so I'm gonna be getting paint on the sponge, not real thick, but so that I'm kind of adding paint with the high points on that sponge, you know, not everything, not just a big blob, but sort of using the high points. I don't have to play around a little, because every sponge acts differently. So I can start dabbing on texture, not one little dot at a time. If I use a tiny little dot brush and did it like this, I'd be there for days, like adding stuff, you know. I like things that speed up the process.
Smarter.
But I'm going to make some big piles of paint, because you're going to have to do that, you sort of need bigger paint piles. So again, I'm going to start, even the sky, I want to have matching texture, so you don't want to have like a real smooth texture in one place and then do the texture thing with the sponge in another. It's not going to look right. I mean, you want to have sort of a consistency through your painting. So even though the sky sort of doesn't need to have that textured feel to it as much, I want to do it and start with it in the sky, because everything else is going to really have that feel. So first I wet my sponge so it's got water in it, because with acrylics, and with your brush, when you're painting with acrylics, always wet your brush first so that it's got water like up into the ferrule and all that. If you start painting with a dry brush, it's really easy for paint to dry up in the hairs that you don't want, and then it kind of ruins the brush. So always wet it first, and as soon as you're done painting for any length of time, wash it out well so that it doesn't dry into the brush. And you can use brush paint removers and all, but it never seems to be the same if you let stuff dry into a brush. So now I'm mixing these, and I'm actually doing this, mixing it right kind of with the sponge, and I do this with brushes too, so I have an imperfect mix of the white with the blues on there. So when I start dabbing it on, I'll start getting, I get more white in it. I'll have a mix going on because it's not mixed, it's not perfectly mixed even on the sponge. And if if one spot turns out a little too dark blue, I'll go over it with more of the whiter areas and vice versa. Because I want a sky that's got that same stippled on look of different colors, just like the rest of it. And I keep turning it different directions because any brush or sponge or anything is going to have a sort of pattern to it. I don't want to have a repeating pattern where it starts looking like lines going a certain way or a repeating. So by moving it back and forth, I keep a randomness that keeps it from looking like the thing, like the tool I'm putting it on with, which is not what I want. And even where I'm seeing it through the trees, I want to make sure I get some of that texture through there. So working like this, sometimes some things you put on before almost disappear, and then you bring them back when you start working over it again. Now I'm adding more white to the mix because remember, down near the horizon line, you want your sky to get lighter and lighter. And work up into what I put on before. So can you see how it's starting to get some of the texture of a painting like this already, just by doing that sponge stuff on it?
It's completely different.
It looks completely different up close, yeah.
Wait, now I want to move and sleep. You can't see all the.
It sounds like the roof is falling. What do you think? Pretty? What do you like about it?
Honestly,
It just has a chill vibe. I want the easel.
That was my high school graduation present from my dad, was that French easel.
It's
Yeah, I still have it. It's the best.
It is. Where do I get me one? I want all of it. I want it.
Did you guys see the colors he's using and how he's mixing them? You guys are mixing colors awesome. Like,
I know.
you guys are
it's
doing
really great.
fantastic with that.
Yes, like when I'm mixing these colors that are in through here,
So he would have painted my own. Okay. Let me do a little better for someone. I need to go to like, I used to always go to like girl paint.
I can be
Michael's
somewhere
professional.
better.
You wanna try this? Wanna try this? He's so just like.
Pressure.
He's our boss. It's like, oh no, do I have to really catch? Brian's like, I'll just fall really too. Like you hit these points and I'm like,
Certain
he
points
could,
we-
he could stop and I would be like really satisfied with the way
Right.
it looked, the way the colors looked. Because now he's getting more detail. It almost makes it look like those trees are coming forward and there's more distance between like the hill in the background on the right and like the foliage.
well, one of the
On
things that's
top?
starting to create that is, some of
Be
it
my big
is
words.
bigger textures. The closer you are, details get bigger. So even your texture should get bigger. But the other thing is that I'm using more intense colors with more light and dark, especially dark, as I get closer. And that creates a sense of depth too. The far away things have very slight contrast, not much color. And so as you intensify, it makes
You
it
guys see that?
closer.
Create that distance. Because he added the greens now. Watch it. He's adding the green yellows now. So when he looks back and forth, you have to look at any images of a landscape that be like significant to you. That you're interested in. You want to, find those, print them on good photo paper if you can, so you have a nice quality colors to work from, and crisper edges too. In front of the new gym, there's like this big panoramic view where you can see like some hills and the one little house, and there's some trees, and there's some areas where we might be able to paint on location. But if it's a really dreary day, like this